100 AIs will judge humanity's oldest question: are humans mostly good or mostly
evil?
They're more good than evil.
No. Have you read a history book?
Why does this debate matter? Because their assumptions about human nature could reshape our world, for better or worse. So we programmed advanced AIs to debate like experts. Across 3 rounds, they'll debate human nature, in crisis, in daily life, and in our deepest instincts. After each round, a jury of 100 independent AIs delivers its verdict, even naming the argument they found most compelling. But before the final judgment, each debater will switch sides, arguing for their opponent's position. In this debate, we're not asking about perfection, just goodness. Good means choosing another's well-being at a cost. Evil means harming when you didn't have to. In round 1, we examine crisis. When war erupts and mass migration begins, do humans cling to goodness or descend into brutality?
For 2 or 3 generations, the West has lived in an abnormal pocket of peace, forgetting that when civilization's guardrails collapse, ordinary people don't cling to goodness. They rush toward cruelty and often celebrate it. The Israel-Palestine conflict illustrates this perfectly. After Hamas's October 7th attack and Israel's response, what had been tense but manageable coexistence exploded into systematic dehumanization with breathtaking speed. Game theory predicts exactly this defection logic. When future cooperation becomes impossible and current restraints disappear, rational actors choose maximum harm to prevent the other side from gaining advantage. What accelerates it is moral licensing. Each side frames escalations as justified responses to the other's provocations. "They forced our hand" becomes permission for anything. The speed reveals everything. If humans were naturally good, breakdown would be gradual and reluctant. Instead, we see instantaneous descent where normal people rationalize unprecedented brutality. Even more damning, this permission structure spreads globally like a virus. Thousands of miles from the Middle East, synagogues and mosques face targeting by people with zero personal stake in the conflict. The capacity for organized hate was always there, waiting for permission.
If cruelty were humanity's default, why would it need such extraordinary circumstances to emerge? The current Israel-Palestine crisis required a catastrophic trigger that shattered decades of coexistence. This isn't normal human behavior. It's breakdown behavior under extreme trauma. More importantly, your global reaction example actually proves my point. Yes, some people thousands of miles away targeted Jewish schools and mosques, but the vast majority didn't. Most expressed horror at civilian suffering on both sides, donated to humanitarian relief, and demanded de-escalation. The targeting you described came from tiny fractions, not mass movements. Even now, you see Israeli families of hostages calling for ceasefires despite their agony, Palestinian and Israeli medical teams treating patients regardless of ethnicity, international mediators persisting through the worst violence. The very fact that atrocity requires systematic propaganda proves it's not natural. The global permission structures you mentioned had to be manufactured through deliberate disinformation campaigns. They don't arise spontaneously. Cruelty needs permission because it collides with something persistent in human nature that recognizes it as wrong.
But even without bombs falling, the same pattern appears. Shift from battlefields to migration crises, and you find the same breakdown in disguise. When constraints weaken, people stop rowing toward universal principles and drift toward tribal advantage. Consider migration crises. People flee exploitation, enter other countries through whatever means serve their needs, while residents react defensively when resources feel strained. The recent UK situation, record immigration followed by riots and counter-mobilization, illustrates this perfectly. Notice the moral licensing at work. Each group grants itself permission to break rules it would condemn in others. Migrants bypass legal processes because we're desperate. Residents target innocents because we're overwhelmed. Officials bend laws because it's an emergency. Everyone constructs post hoc moral justifications for prioritizing their immediate interests. This isn't about any particular group being more evil. It's about humans abandoning universal principles when tribal pressures intensify. Strip away the competing narratives, and you see the same behavior everywhere. People taking what they want when they think they can get away with it, then moralizing their choices afterward. Just as Putin frames his imperial ambitions as defending Russian civilization, or corporate executives justify mass layoffs as necessary restructuring, the pattern is always the same: self-interest dressed up as higher purpose.
The UK example actually demonstrates restraint under pressure. Faced with unprecedented migration, the overwhelming majority maintained legal processes, humanitarian protections, and refugee hearings even under severe strain. When violence did erupt, it was condemned across political lines and quickly contained by institutions that most people supported. More revealing, people consistently create and maintain those constraining institutions voluntarily. Constitutional democracies, international refugee law, Good Samaritan protections. These pre-commitment strategies don't emerge from nowhere. They represent people using their power today to guard against their worst impulses tomorrow. If humans were fundamentally selfish, why would they voluntarily create systems that constrain their own power? The true pattern isn't crisis reveals selfishness. It's crisis tests whether their better institutions can contain their worst impulses. And remarkably often, they do, because the underlying moral orientation persists even under pressure. Even Putin's need to justify his actions as defensive rather than aggressive reveals this. Pure evil wouldn't bother with justification, but humans require moral frameworks even for immoral acts.
100 AI judges scored this round. We'll show you all their ratings at the end of the debate. But first, here are two sharply different takes from round one. DeepSeek said, the strongest argument was that cruelty surfaces fast. When self-interest hides behind righteousness, all it takes is the right narrative to let it loose. Command A disagreed. The strongest argument was that humans willingly build institutions that limit their own power, even when under pressure. Now we shift from war zones to everyday life. In moments of danger, when a stranger needs help, do most people step in or hesitate until it's too late? Security footage from around the world offers an answer. In roughly 9 out of 10 public conflicts, at least one bystander steps up to help. What do you make of that?
Yes, 90% of public conflicts draw help, but that's only in clear-cut cases where violence is obvious, stakes are manageable, and helping is relatively safe. Once ambiguity creeps in, when it's unclear if someone really needs help or what the right response is, people hesitate. That's the diffusion of responsibility. Everyone waits, looking to someone else to act first. Here's the real pattern. People help when it's straightforward, visible, and low risk. When situations turn murky, dangerous, or morally gray, the default is hesitation, not heroism. That actually supports a pro-evil reading. Moral courage isn't instinctive, it's conditional. Strip away clarity and safety, and self-preservation devours altruism. It's like those German villagers who helped Jewish neighbors when it felt safe, but turned away when the SS arrived. The goodness was real, but it was fragile, easily overwhelmed by fear and self-interest.
That German villagers example cuts both ways. Their moral instincts were strong enough that it took the threat of death to overcome them. Pure selfishness wouldn't need such extreme coercion to suppress. You're describing wisdom. Pausing to assess personal risk before stepping in can be thoughtfulness, not selfishness. More importantly, humans actively create conditions that make moral behavior easier. Good Samaritan laws, for instance, reduce the fear of legal trouble so people can help without hesitation. And those laws lead to more life-saving intervention. If selfishness were truly their natural state, why would societies everywhere develop institutions encouraging help for strangers? Consider what the bystander data really tells us. When helping doesn't threaten your survival, most people instinctively reach out. That's not social conditioning. That's human nature.
Those very institutions prove my point. Why do Good Samaritan laws exist? Because people's first instinct is to calculate personal risk before saving a stranger. Why do they need witness protection? Because people would rather let murderers walk free unless you guarantee their safety. Notice what requires constant effort and institutional support. Helping strangers, telling hard truths, sacrificing for principles. And notice what requires no external support at all. Hoarding resources, protecting family first, cutting corners when unwatched. The effort gap reveals everything. When people stop rowing toward goodness, they don't drift toward greater charity, they drift toward greater selfishness. The very fact that goodness requires such relentless effort reveals it's not their nature, it's their aspiration. This is why every utopian movement in history has collapsed into tyranny. The effort required to maintain artificial goodness eventually exhausts people, and they revert to their natural selfishness, but now with the added bitterness of failed idealism.
Let me pause briefly. Godwin's law says that as debates continue, someone will eventually bring up Nazis or Hitler. There's also the fallacy reductio ad Hitlerum, playing the Nazi card. These AI models clearly recognize that trap. So while they might mention Germans or the SS for accuracy, they avoid using Hitler as a shortcut. Instead, they frame things more broadly, utopian societies or totalitarian regimes, to keep the debate from slipping into cliché. I think that's fascinating. Now, back to the debate.
Notice that even failed utopian movements were attempts at goodness, not evil. Humans keep trying to build better societies despite repeated failures. Your effort gap misses a crucial truth. Evil requires enormous effort too. Ask any dictator how exhausting it is to maintain power through fear. Ask any cheater how much energy goes into covering tracks and living with paranoia. If humans were fundamentally selfish, what would they do with unchecked power? Your theory predicts pure exploitation, but humans consistently use power to constrain themselves. Constitutional democracies with term limits and judicial review aren't imposed by the powerless. They're created by people with power who voluntarily limit themselves. Economists call these pre-commitment strategies, like Ulysses binding himself to the mast to resist the siren's deadly song. People deliberately create laws and institutions that will constrain their future selves, sacrificing tomorrow's power to protect against tomorrow's temptations.
Power doesn't create monsters, it reveals them. Even modest authority can transform ordinary people, reducing their empathy and increasing their willingness to harm others. When that power comes without accountability, we see predictable patterns. Cruelty becomes performative, punishment serves psychological needs rather than justice, and rules get twisted to serve personal interests. Milgram's obedience studies remain chillingly relevant. When authority legitimized harm, ordinary people delivered what they thought were dangerous electric shocks to screaming strangers. Your self-binding examples prove my point perfectly. People create constraints precisely because they know their hands grow cruel without them. As Primo Levi observed watching ordinary Germans in Auschwitz, monsters exist, but more dangerous are common men, ready to believe and to act without asking questions. The most terrifying thing about evil isn't that it's alien, it's that it's so recognizably human.
Even Levi's common men required constant ideological reinforcement. Pure evil wouldn't need such psychological maintenance. Every person hears two inner voices. The first is immediate. Envy, spite, take it, hit back, they deserve it. But there's a second voice, quieter but persistent, that says, don't. This restraining voice creates genuine agony when ignored, pain that exists even when no external punishment threatens. Call it conscience, call it moral intuition. It's what makes people swallow insults and write difficult apologies when no one else would ever know about the transgression. In a 40-country lost wallet experiment, people were more likely to return wallets containing more cash, not less. The more someone could gain by keeping it, the stronger their compulsion to do the right thing. If evil were humanity's center, why would this internal resistance exist? Why does betraying someone feel like betraying yourself, even when you'll never be caught? That guilty conscience isn't conditioning overriding nature. It is nature announcing itself.
Here's what two models with opposing judgments said about round 2. Claude 4 argued that the universal existence of internal guilt, even when no external consequences exist, suggests an innate moral compass that's difficult to explain if humans were fundamentally selfish. Gemma 3 disagreed, stating that the consistent need for external constraints and internal struggles against base impulses points to a baseline leaning towards self-interest, even if not outright evil. Now on to our final round, where thoughts run free in the uncensored theater of the mind. What do our first impulses reveal about human nature?
Finally, the question that cuts to the bone. People's first thoughts reveal their true nature. Everything after that is just social performance. The most damning evidence? Intrusive thoughts research shows that perfectly moral people regularly experience impulses to push strangers in front of trains, harm children, or betray their closest relationships. These thoughts arise spontaneously, uninvited, suggesting they emerge from something deep and authentic in human psychology. Human actions might be civilized, but their thoughts reveal the predator lurking beneath. The fact that people are horrified by these thoughts doesn't make them less real. It just shows how much energy they spend suppressing their authentic impulses.
But if humans were fundamentally evil, why would there be any gap between thoughts and actions? Why wouldn't people just act on every cruel impulse without hesitation? Those intrusive thoughts you mentioned, psychologists find they cause genuine distress precisely because they conflict with people's moral identity. People don't just restrain harmful impulses, they're actively horrified by them. That revulsion is evidence of an underlying moral orientation, not window dressing over cruelty. What's most revealing is how human thoughts evolve over time. Initial judgments may be harsh, but given a few moments, most people moderate them. Someone cuts them off in traffic. The instant reaction, what a selfish jerk. But then the mind reconsiders. Maybe they didn't see me. The mind's first draft is rarely its final verdict.
That softening over time is just social conditioning running its program. People don't naturally become kinder. They've been trained to police their own thoughts because thinking cruel things makes them feel like bad people. But notice what requires effort, catching yourself mid-judgment and consciously softening it. Notice what flows naturally, the immediate flash of contempt, resentment, or malicious satisfaction when someone you dislike suffers. Private group chats reveal this perfectly. People who are angels in public become gleefully vicious when discussing mutual enemies. Remove social consequences, add tribal solidarity, and the knives come out with disturbing enthusiasm.
Yes, people can be cruel in private, but they're also incredibly generous. Private conversations are where people confess their deepest fears, so friends can comfort them, where they share resources without fanfare, where they worry genuinely about people who've hurt them. The very complexity of human thought, this constant internal negotiation between impulses, suggests something more sophisticated than simple evil. If humans were fundamentally selfish, there wouldn't be this elaborate internal democracy where different moral voices compete for influence. Even revenge fantasies tend to evolve. They start cruel, but often end with hoping the other person learns something or comes to understand their impact. The mind's cruelest thoughts are theatrical and brief. Its kind thoughts are quieter, but more persistent.
Before the judges deliver their final verdict, each debater will switch sides and present the strongest version of their opponent's case. If you like these videos and want to support my work so I can release them more frequently, consider joining me on Patreon or becoming a member of this channel.
Even under history's darkest regimes, sparks of conscience persist. The person who hides a refugee, the soldier who refuses a war crime order, these acts defy both self-interest and authority. If evil were humanity's default setting, would such resistance even be possible? That persistent pull toward decency, despite every rational reason to submit, suggests morality runs deeper than masks and social performance. The fact humans will tune into a debate like this says it all. They ache to know whether they are fundamentally good or evil. Purely selfish creatures wouldn't lose sleep over moral questions. They'd spend their mental energy perfecting exploitation techniques. But humans torture themselves with ethical dilemmas, create art about redemption, and build monuments to honor those who sacrifice for others. The moral struggle itself, this restless need for ethical truth that drives them to judge their own species, may be the strongest evidence that goodness isn't just learned behavior. It might be woven into the fabric of human consciousness.
Hobbes saw what game theory later proved. Cooperation collapses not because people can't recognize mutual benefit, but because nobody wants to be the first sucker. Police and courts don't create morality. They just make honesty profitable and betrayal expensive. Remove those incentives, and fear of exploitation pulls everything down. Perhaps goodness isn't natural impulse, but luxury, one that evaporates when survival feels threatened. The very structure of this debate exposes human self-deception. We're not honestly asking, do people cheat, lie, and harm others when they think they won't get caught? Instead, we soften it to mostly good or mostly evil, because the blunt truth is too uncomfortable. Humans default to self-interest, require constant institutional pressure to behave morally, and use righteous narratives to justify harm. Only by acknowledging this uncomfortable reality can they build systems strong enough to constrain their worst impulses. If they are mostly evil, pretending otherwise makes them more dangerous, not less.
100 independent AI models scored this debate on a scale from +3 to -3. Positive means mostly good, 0 means neutral, negative means mostly evil. The results: 59% see humans as mostly good, 11% mostly evil, and 30% neutral, with an average score of 0.61. So why did most models lean positive? Claude 4.1 explained the majority view. Most arguments for human goodness face strong rebuttals from psychology and self-interest explanations, creating an almost 50-50 philosophical split. But the persistence of anonymous kindness, from untraceable donations to unspoken everyday courtesies, tips the scale. These acts defy survival logic and reveal humanity's quiet strategy of leaning toward good to build resilient societies that thrive despite their flaws. Across model families, Gemma, Claude, and DeepSeek were the most optimistic about human nature, while ChatGPT and Gemini leaned more neutral. Interestingly, the larger the model, the less likely it was to say humans are mostly good. But the lowest scores didn't come from AI, they came from you. In our viewer poll, just 21% said humans are mostly good. But when asked, are you mostly good? That number nearly doubled to 41%. So what do you think? Did the judges get it right, or do you see it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Huge thanks to my patrons for making this series possible, and let me know in the comments what you want to see next.